Now, the idea is that permanent impairment doesn't affect people in the same way. Someone who's 20 years old that has a permanent impairment rating may be different than someone who's 60 having that same impairment percentage, because the idea is the younger person may find meaningful work and rehabilitate in the workforce, or maybe long term their body's actually going to recover better than someone who's 60.
Bilal, we're so happy to have you back on the podcast. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here, like always.
We're excited to pick your brain because today's topic, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the topics that has a lot of injured workers confused, especially because it involves percentages, numbers, and there's just not a lot of information for them to Google or even to ChatGPT to truly understand how permanent disability ratings work or how do they actually work in California. So I want to know what really happens when you're injured at work and your doctor says your condition is PNS, permanent and stationary. Can you please describe that for someone who's just new to the system and is about to get to that stage and they don't understand this term?
Sure. So permanent stationary is an old term. We don't use it all that much anymore, but some doctors still do. The new term is called MMI. MMI stands for maximum medical improvement. Permanent stationary stands for permanent stationary. We use PNS as an abbreviation for that.
Yeah.
Really, what it means is that you've medically plateaued. Both terms essentially mean that the doctor feels like your condition's not going to change in any real material way. It doesn't matter whether they do surgery, injections, physical therapy, medication, that you've reached your best. And it's not necessarily for all time. People's condition may get better or it may get worse over time. The idea is that workers' comp cases, they can't go on forever. And the legislature created kind of this artificial cutoff point in cases to signify a stopping point for purposes of determining essentially what your case is worth. And really, it means that you're not going to get any better for the foreseeable 12 months. That's really what it means in practical terms. And so it's that cutoff point for your workers' comp case where things like whole person impairment and therefore permanent disability are assessed.
Okay, so someone gets injured. They've already went through the process of the qualified medical evaluation. They've gotten to the point where they've no longer are going to be able to, like you mentioned, for at least the next 12 months, they're not going to get any better. They're stuck where they're at. So then the permanent disability rating comes into play for an injured worker. What goes into this formula? How does the doctor come up with this rating?
So when we talk about the disability, there's two components. There's what we call whole person impairment, and then there's permanent disability. Whole person impairment is the baseline permanent impairment that the doctor will assess at your evaluation. That number is based on a percentage, which is based on what we call the AMA Guides for Rating Impairment, which is the book that basically describes to what extent the doctors can give you a disability percentage based on either functional losses, what we call diagnosis-based estimates, or surgical outcomes and things like that. So for example, you may have a total knee replacement with a good outcome, and that has a 20% whole person impairment rating attached to it. Or for example, you may have torn rotator cuff in your shoulder, and so you lose range of motion. And so the doctor may say you've lost this much range of motion, so you have this much permanent impairment. Now, the idea is that permanent impairment doesn't affect people in the same way. Someone who's 20 years old that has a permanent impairment rating may be different than someone who's 60 having that same impairment percentage, because the idea is the younger person may find meaningful work and rehabilitate in the workforce, or maybe long term their body's actually going to recover better than someone who's 60. And same thing for the type of occupation someone's engaged in at the time of their injury. We see that someone who has a more physical job and has a physical injury may be more restricted from going back to work and pursuing meaningful employment based on the type of occupation and experience they have as well. And so we take whole person impairment and we apply a formula to it, and then we come up with permanent disability, which is actually what the monetary value of the case is based on adjusting for those factors, as well as the impairment percentage the doctor assigns.
Yeah, so it's not like a doctor comes in and says, I'm gonna give you a 10%. And this is what, no, there's actually, you're mentioning the age factor is one
Mhm.
thing, what you do for a living, your occupation, your position. So there's a lot of components that fall into place to coming up with this rating. What happens when you already have pre-existing injuries? Say, for example, someone has arthritis on their arm and their wrist, and they injured themselves, they slipped, they fell, and injured their hand even more. But because they've already previously had arthritis, they can't say that the entire 100% of that injury is due to the injury itself. So, can you explain what happens in this step by step guide on how this rating comes into place? How they would work with pre existing injuries, and how does that formula change?
Sure. So when the doctor does a permanent impairment rating, they have to take into account causation of injury and causation of the permanent impairment. And when they look at the causation of the permanent impairment, they have to consider whether there's pre-existing conditions that would cause or contribute to what the current assessment is. And so to the extent that someone had a pre-existing condition that combined now with their injury has made them have this percentage impairment rating, the doctor may have to say that some part of this permanent impairment rating is apportionable to pre-existing condition. The legal term apportionment, just in workers' comp, refers to the doctor taking portions of causation for injury or portions of causation for disability and attributing them to things other than the workers' compensation case. And it's something we see quite often. There's a number of reasons someone can have pre-existing conditions, either just natural deterioration, natural aging. They could be born with certain conditions that impact their current injury, or they could have prior workers' compensation injuries or just non-industrial injuries like car accidents, slip and falls, and things like that. Being stupid as a kid, jumping off roofs, whatever it is, that
Or just
ultimately,
riding a skateboard.
yeah, riding a skateboard, doing things that ultimately made you a little more fragile than you would be otherwise, such that when you had this work comp injury, had you not had these pre-existing conditions, you wouldn't be as bad as you are now. And so the doctor does look at those things, and really our job is to ensure that the doctor's not over apportioning to things that don't really matter. There's been some pretty cool cases that have come out that have helped injured workers. This one was a couple years ago. It's called Hikita. Basically, Hikita said that if someone has work comp medical treatment and their work comp medical treatment substantially aggravates their permanent rating, their permanent impairment rating, it doesn't matter if they have pre-existing conditions. If the rating is what it is because there was some, say, a surgical procedure that was botched, then ultimately they get the benefit of saying that all of their permanent impairment is attributable to the work comp case. It didn't
Hmm.
matter if, otherwise, let's say 20% would be attributable to pre-existing conditions. The legislature threw injured workers a win, and so did the courts by interpreting that to say, hey, look, if someone has a complication from medical treatment that was due to workers' compensation, we don't really care so much that it's got some pre-existing conditions attached to it because, but for the work comp medical treatment, they wouldn't have this impairment rating. So there's been some wins and some clarifying cases that have come out recently on apportionment that have really helped injured workers fight that and get all their permanent disability attached to their workers' compensation case. Um,
Interesting. Are there any deadlines that, come into place when you're getting a permanent disability rating here in the California system of workers' comp? And when deadlines are like, I don't know, do you have I guess, a specific time where they have to pay you? And if they don't pay you, something happens. I don't know.
So, a couple of different things. One, your permanent impairment gets converted to permanent disability. Permanent disability is supposed to be paid within the 14 days from the last payment of temporary disability. So, that's just your starting rule for when you're owed permanent disability.
Okay.
And to some extent, the insurance carriers are responsible for advancing permanent disability while your case is still pending. So that means even if you haven't returned to work, even if you don't necessarily have a permanent impairment rating, if there is a likelihood that you will and your temporary disability has stopped, you're actually owed the advances, at least based on a reasonable amount of what would be calculated. Sometimes that's very difficult to do. An exception to that would be if you've returned to work. If you are in a new job, the same job, earning at least 85% of what you earned before your injury, or you've returned to, or sorry, I said that backwards, earning 100% of what you earned before your injury. So same amount, but new job, different employer, whatever. Or you've returned to the same job earning at least 85% of what you earned prior to your injury, they are not required to advance permanent disability payments while your case is pending. So the idea is, look, that if you're back to work, permanent impairment's not really needed right now. We don't have to worry about advancing this because you're back and you're working, so it's not so
Yeah.
impactful for you. That is, we see that quite a bit usually. The whole idea, though, is that your permanent disability doesn't disappear during that time. So you'd be advanced those benefits. It's accruing so that once your case actually settles, they owe you the retro amount since you were deemed permanent stationary or MMI. So you may be in a position with your case where your permanent disability is all saved up because you've returned to work. And so by the time your case settles, regardless of the type of settlement, say compromise and release or stipulated award, your permanent disability is paid to you in a lump sum, or at least as much as has accrued if it's a stipulated award.
How long does it take for an injured worker to get this rating? What does that, is there even an average where you could say from the moment someone got injured, submitted their claim with the DWC-1 form to the point where you're getting this actual permanent disability rating? Is it 2 years?
It depends. I can say on average from my law office, our average is about 18 months to resolve a case start to finish.
Okay.
Of course, that doesn't account for when the person was actually injured. Some people come to us when they've already been in a case for 2 years, 5 years, 1 year, 6 months. It's all over the place. But what I can say is that the idea of being maximally medically improved is largely dependent on whether or not you got there medically. It's not a legal question, it's a medical question. So to the extent that doctors feel as though you haven't reached that plateau yet, you may not receive permanent disability benefits for a while. The idea is that the doctor is there to ensure that you're getting a fair shake, that you're getting all the treatment that you should get to help you recover from your injury. And to the extent that's still happening, you won't be MMI.
Who is the one that gives you that rating? What doctor? Because you keep mentioning the doctor. However, we know there's different types of doctors within the workers' comp system. So is this the doctor you see all the time that gives you this rating?
It could be. There's a couple different types of doctors you see in workers' comp. The most common is your primary treating physician. It's your quarterback doctor. They're the ones that are writing requests for authorization for treatment and seeing you all the time. They write permanent stationary MMI reports. Largely, I would say most cases settle based on qualified medical evaluator reports. And those are the evaluators that their sole existence, their job is to evaluate you and address things like permanent disability, work restrictions, disability status, future medical, all that jazz. So usually those are the doctor reports that are used for settlement because treating physicians are treating. They're not the best reliable source for getting long narrative reports addressing medical records and things like that. There are some doctors that are really good at it. Shout out to Boomerang, Pain and Rehab. There's doctors out there that'll do a really good job of taking the time to review medical records and write very long, well-written reports for things like permanent disability and such, but not all doctors. And so I'd say more often than not, we go to QMEs or agreed medical evaluators to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense because there's offices that are super busy, right? And it's another patient, like, hurry up, let's get through the system quickly. When then there's Pain and Rehab, Dr. Morley, Dr. Jamasby, their entire crew understands that their report is so impactful to someone's life that they are going to take that extra time to dig deep and do what they have to do. Now that you mentioned that, obviously doctors matter in this. What is some of the other challenges people face with this permanent disability rating? And I think we can wrap it up with that question as far as just what are some challenges that people will face?
There's different ways to rate permanent disability. The AMA guides is like 18 different chapters. It's hundreds and hundreds of tables and different ways that you can assess permanent impairment based on injuries. And there's been some cases that basically say, to the extent the doctor feels it's necessary, they can use any table in any chapter of the AMA guides to give you permanent impairment. For example, there's one chapter that deals specifically with the spine. A lot of doctors will just default to, okay, we have a lumbar spine injury or cervical spine injury, thoracic spine injury. So I'm going to go to those specific tables and only use those specific ways to rate impairment. Versus other doctors may say, you know what, I understand there's some case law out there that lets me use any table and any chapter in this book to give this person the most impairment possible. And so a doctor rating a spine impairment might actually go and use neurological impairment, or may use what we call a gait derangement impairment, meaning your ability to walk and things like that, to rate a spine impairment because it's higher, it's better for the injured worker. Not a lot of doctors do that. Sometimes you have to present that as a question to them or cross examine them in deposition, asking them why they didn't do that, if it actually is more representative of what the person's impairment is. So, finding doctors that understand the AMA guides to the extent that it really benefits the injured worker to the maximum possible, that's a challenge and certainly something we run into quite often in my practice. And really also just ensuring that the doctor is actually going to cover each and every body part. And actually, even if they're using the whole AMA guides to rate your impairment, that they're actually giving you a fair shot, that they're
Yeah.
assessing each and every body part as they should be, that they're not lowballing the impairment or leaving out body parts or not calculating the impairments combined correctly. So there's a lot of different ways that I think, even though it's a medical question, there's certainly a legal aspect to it too that is really important.
Great. Thank you so much, Bilal, for sharing all of this information. I think we have a clearer picture as to how the permanent disability rating works in the California workers' comp system. If people want to get a hold of you, your team, they have questions specific to their case, obviously you have a whole team behind your business. Where can they get that information online?
So go on our website. We do have a blog. Blog has a lot of recent articles. We also do a ton of YouTube with videos explaining a lot of these topics. We've done a number of work comp top episodes on this stuff too. So I encourage everyone to check out all our videos and definitely YouTube, Work Comp Talk, listen to our podcast, go on our blog, read about it. We also have an ebook that you can download as well, covering a lot of these topics that you can read through at your own pace. And then ultimately, it is a lot of information. It can be really confusing. So to the extent you feel like you're lost, I would say just reach out to us. We do have an intake team that's more than happy to just simply answer your questions and talk you through problems and give you the confidence I think you need to be successful. And if you're not willing to take on your own case, we're certainly happy to help you with it too. So.
For sure. And I'm going to link all of this information down below. What we're going to do is create a resource link. You'll be able to get the link directly to download the book. Obviously, the website to Pacific Workers will be on there as well. You can text them, email them, chat with them. If you don't want to speak to them directly, they can totally just chat with you while you're at work and you don't get caught. Also, obviously, you mentioned the YouTube channels. There are two different YouTube channels. So we have the podcast channel, the Work Comp Talk podcast, and there's also the Pacific Workers channel as well. We host the monthly webinars, Bilal, where we tackle very important questions and pain points within the workers' comp system. And we dive deep into those conversations for 1 hour. So those are pretty cool as well. But for the most part, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Make sure you hit the little subscribe so you get notified when we upload new content as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can do the same thing. Hit the bell notification to get notified when we upload new content, which is on a weekly basis. We do hope you share this information if you found it helpful. And if you have questions as well, write them down in the comments below. We'll be more than happy to answer those questions. If there's a specific topic you want us to record, we can do that as well. So we'll catch you guys on the next episode of Work Comp Talk. Thank you so much, Bilal.